This is Doug DeMuro, and today I'm going to tell you the 9 most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed. I get this question a lot. Have you ever had a car where you showed up, you were all excited to review it, then you actually drove it, and it was really not, it didn't measure up? And the answer is not all that often, actually. A lot more cars surprise me in the positive direction than the negative, but it has happened, and some cars have disappointed me a lot more than I expected, and so today I'm going to tell you what they are. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. Cars and Bids has around 600,000 registered users all participating in our auctions of cool, special, exciting cars like this, and this, and this, and this. If you're looking to buy or sell an enthusiast car from the modern era, do it on carsandbids.com. Okay, so the 9 most disappointing cars I've reviewed. And again, this is not the 9 worst cars I've reviewed. If you want to see those, you can go on the DOUGSCORE spreadsheet and you can just go to the bottom and those are the worst cars I've reviewed. Some of them were so bad that they were comical and it was fun and fine. This is about cars that I was expecting to be good and then were quite bad. Disappointing. Cars that disappointed me. And I think that's almost a worse position to be in. I go drive a BMW Isetta or a Trabant or a Yugo or a Tuk-Tuk and I know it's going to be terrible, right? But you go drive a car that you think is going to be good and then it's really bad, that is actually kind of worse. And so let's talk through some of my biggest automotive disappointments. Now, these are not ranked in order. I do not want to be responsible for naming a car the #1 disappointment. These are alphabetical, and you can decide which one is the most disappointing based on how I talk about it. So, starting from the start, the alphabetically most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed, the Jaguar I-Pace. I remember when the I-Pace came out, and it was like 2018 or 19, and basically at that time, other automakers were trying hard to get electric vehicles to market, and no one was. And Tesla was just sitting there grabbing market share from all these luxury car brands. Like they had the X and the Model S and the 3 had just come out, and everybody, and Tesla was not only making the great electric car, but they were way ahead. And frankly, they still are in a lot of ways. They were way ahead in the electric car that they had developed. And so the Jaguar I-Pace comes out and it gives some hope. It's like, oh, here's a car. This is happening. Here's a car that's just come out that's finally here to rival Tesla. And I remember driving the I-Pace and reviewing the I-Pace and thinking, like it had just missed a lot of what made the Teslas so desirable. Over-the-air updates and the supercharging and the range for dollar value and the performance level, it just wasn't there. It wasn't competitive. The I-Pace was a good car. It was an excellent car for people who didn't want a Tesla, but especially at that time, before we knew Elon Musk was insane, there weren't a lot of people who just didn't want a Tesla. Most people did or were willing to. And so the I-Pace was supposed to be this, okay, here's legacy auto finally coming in to take on the big EV, Tesla. And it just was a non-competitive car. And that became clear very quickly. And there were very big deals and incentives on these cars to try to move them. And they never became popular, deservedly so. And I don't know if it's still in production, but obviously Jaguar is like shutting down everything to retool the whole brand. So that gives you an idea, at least in their mind, of where that went and how successful that was. Tesla ain't shutting down to retool the whole brand. The I-Pace was just a flop. It just wasn't what it could have and should have been. And by the way, that's especially true considering how many years they had to watch what made Tesla so appealing to consumers and then try to replicate that. And after all that time and all that ability to develop, they just didn't do a great job developing. Next up, most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed. I'm not looking forward to the blowback on this one, but it's my honest opinion and I'm going to give it to you. The Lexus LFA. The Lexus LFA is, bar none, one of the greatest sounding cars of all time. And I gotta be honest, I have heard one recently. It's always said that the LFA and the Carrera GT are the 2 best sounding cars of all time. And I gotta be honest, I'm a Carrera GT guy. I've got one. I don't particularly like the LFA. I've got a Carrera GT. You'd think I would be like, no, Carrera GT is better. But I heard an LFA driving the other day. The LFA is better. The LFA simply sounds better. It's a better sounding car. They're both amazing. And honestly, calling this the 2nd best sounding car of all time isn't exactly a criticism. The LFA sounds better. Unfortunately, in every single other possible way, the LFA is not better. And I remember going to drive that car and hoping for the best. And there are some real drawbacks to the LFA. When it first came out, the LFA was an unsellable stone that sat on dealership showrooms and nobody was interested in buying one. And in fact, a huge portion of LFAs went to Lexus dealership owners who bailed out Lexus and just bought the damn car and said, fine, I'll take it, whatever, because they couldn't find anybody else to buy it. And I remember when the LFA was gonna first come out, they had said there won't be any selling of this car. It's gonna be lease only to curb speculation. And then there was no speculation because no one was actually interested in having an LFA. And eventually they had to hire a full-time employee who took the car around to various events trying to convince people to buy one. It wasn't a good situation. And frankly, I think that that's what the car deserved. In the last few years, the LFA's reputation has grown. Oh, the LFA, it's so cool. And I see people now on Reddit and car forums say, oh, I always loved the LFA. It's like, no, you didn't. I was there. I was of age. In 2012, I was like 25. I was working for a car company. I was paying attention to what was going on, and everybody was criticizing the LFA. And now, 10 years later, people are finally starting to get into this, oh, I love the LFA. It's so cool. I don't think it's particularly cool. I still think that the problems that people criticized it for when it was a new car are still valid today, which is it has a very clunky, bad, poorly designed, not good transmission. It's just not a good driving car when you're driving along. And that's a pretty important part of what you want from a car. You know, the Carrera GT had a manual transmission that is sublime. One of the greatest manuals I've ever driven. Drove this car to work today and I'm like, always astonished by how perfect that car is. The LFA, by comparison, clunks around. The transmission is just so bad. It's so clunky and slow to change gears. And it came at this horrible era where we were just at the end of the single clutch, which is what the LFA has, and about to start with the dual clutch transmissions, and the dual clutches are just so much better. And the LFA would have been great with a manual transmission. Toyota has a history of wonderful manual sports cars like the Mark IV Supra, but they didn't. It would have been great with a dual clutch automatic, and then it would have been faster and exciting and all that, but they didn't. And so it has this clunky, bad transmission. The other issue with the LFA is it simply is not particularly attractive. Lexus really wanted a Halo car, desperately wanted a Halo car to try to bring people into the showrooms after they watched the success that Audi had with the R8. And what happened was they priced the LFA too high and they didn't make it attractive enough of a car. And so nobody really knew that it was there. It wasn't bringing people into showrooms because it was too rare and too expensive. And then when they came into showrooms, they were like, this? It wasn't daring enough of a car. The R8 was this mid-engine, cool-looking thing, and it also just wasn't attractive enough as a car. It was not a particularly well-styled car. And Lexus still felt that the Halo car was worth it after the LFA and did a great job of coming out with the LC, which was both more attractive and less expensive. And frankly, I think the LC is the more attractive car compared to the LFA. You put them next to each other, and people would pick the LC 9 times out of 10. Now, car enthusiasts watching this are going to say, no, I would never do that. Well, because you know the LFA is the special one. But if you show it to a random on the street, the two cars next to each other, they're going to say the LC looks better. They just will. It was a better looking car. And so to me, the LFA was too expensive. It was not attractive enough, and it just doesn't drive all that great. It sounds better than any other car. But it was a disappointment. And the cars have gone up in value to a level that I think is ridiculous. The Nürburgring edition LFAs are $1 million. I think that is insane for that car. It does not deserve it. But I do take solace in the reminder that they only made 300 LFAs, and a regular one is still an 800 car, whereas they made 1,270 Carrera GTs, and even the worst one is $1 million. And the market speaks loudly there. The market prefers analog, attractive, good driving cars. The LFA, I think, has become way more valued than it deserves to be, but it's still not a market darling, although it has come up. And frankly, I felt it was a disappointment. Now, again, that one will be controversial. Here's a supercar opinion that will be less controversial. Most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed, the McLaren Elva. The McLaren Elva is an absolutely ridiculous car. I know a couple of really rich people who are desperate for whatever reason to get into McLaren's good graces, and even they passed on the McLaren Elva. For those who don't know, the Elva is basically a 720S without a windshield or a roof. And for some reason, McLaren thought that this was a cool idea. And not only that, but they were going to sell it for $2 or $3 million. The market, interestingly, a lot of roofless cars came out at this era. Aston Martin had one, the Speedster, something or other. Ferrari had the Monza SP1 and SP2. The market didn't like any of those cars. None of them have greatly appreciated in value. Some have declined, including the Elva. It was overproduced. It was weird looking. It is not a drivable car. Who wants to drive a car without a roof? it is just not a they eventually added a windshield as an option, which was like went against the whole purpose of the car, but they needed to sell them. It was a great example of McLaren going too far in the direction of making special cars that simply weren't special. Too many special editions, too many special models, just too far. And the Elva was probably the worst example of that. It was, not only was it not special, it was just a 720S without a roof, but they overproduced it, overpriced it, and no one wanted to drive it. And I thought it was cool as hell. It had some really amazing quirks and features, but it just wasn't the type of car that I had any interest in using, and I think that's true for most people who bought them, frankly. Okay, next car, 9 most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed. The new Mercedes-AMG C63. Does not need to be a lot of conversation or dialogue here. Everybody knows this car has been a disappointment, including Mercedes-Benz, who I notice has really held the release of the new E63, and I assume that's because there was a scramble to the drawing board to kind of retool and not give that car a lesser engine like the C63 got. The basic gist is the new C63 is a great car. It's attractive. It actually drives pretty well despite its massive weight, but it is simply not a fun car to drive because of its 4-cylinder engine. It feels like a Mercedes Subaru STI. And I like the Subaru STI, but the Subaru STI is not a $100,000 car that previously had a V8. You just don't want to be driving around in a peaky turbo 4-cylinder when you should be driving around in at least a turbo V6, but probably a turbo V8. New C63, a disappointment. I'm a Mercedes-Benz guy. I own 2 right now. I've owned 12 probably in my life. They're great cars. I love a lot of things about them. That car, I'm just going to tell the truth, it is not a desirable car. It was a big disappointment. Next up, most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed. This is also going to be a controversial one, but I'm not that disappointed in it. It's the Pagani Huayra. The Pagani Huayra is an interesting car. Pagani made the Zonda, and it was one of the greatest cars of all time. I've been lucky enough to drive a Zonda, not very far, not very fast, but I drove one, and it is an unbelievable car. The dynamics are incredible. The appearance is incredible. The shift action, clutch, it's all absolutely amazing. Really, really, really special. The Huayra, by comparison, was Pagani embracing their personalization and beautification era rather than the driving experience era. And so the Huayra has an automatic transmission, a sequential manual that doesn't feel that great. Frankly, I find the V12, for some reason in that car, to just not really do it for me. The Mercedes V12, it's a great engine, but it's a Autobahn fast engine, not a supercar performance car engine. And I've had the same criticism with the SL65 Black Series. Taking that engine and making it into a sports car, that's not what the engine was designed for. It was designed for massive high-speed cruising. Remember, the first car that engine went into was the S65 and the CL65. Those were cars that were intended to be cruising on the Autobahn at 150 miles an hour for 4 hours on end. Then some people repurposed that engine for supercars, and it just never felt right. And the Huayra had a lot of incredibly cool little details, switch-geared buttons and touches, and I mean, it was incredibly well made. But the problem is the driving experience wasn't as much of a focus, and the Zonda was simply a better car to drive. I haven't driven the new Pagani Utopia yet, but the fact that they went back to a manual transmission says to me that they realized a lot of what made the Zonda special, and they went back to the driving experience part of the thing. And I have a suspicion that in time, the Huayra will be kind of viewed as the lesser Pagani. The Zonda's the desirable one. It had a manual. It was really low production. The Utopia has a manual. It goes back to the driving experience. The Huayra was the beauty one, and it was not the driver's car that the other ones are. Again, I say this without having driven a Utopia, so I don't know, but I love the Huayra. It was fast, it was cool, it was amazing. It's only a disappointment relative to the other Pagani models, but I would say it is a disappointment relative to the other Pagani models. Okay, next up, most disappointing cars I have ever reviewed. This one is an easy one, the Polestar 1. The Polestar 1, for those of you who don't know, was Polestar's first vehicle, and it was a luxury coupe that was intended to kind of be a halo car. But what ended up happening was nobody bought it. The Polestar 1 was supposed to be like the brand is being revealed, and so they're only going to build 1,500 of these special cars, fully electric, and it's going to be like the launch of Polestar, and it's going to show everybody that Polestar's here and they mean business. Well, the problem was nobody wanted to pay, it was $157,000. Nobody wanted to pay that money for an electric car from a brand they had never heard of, which was also Volvo. Like, it was just never going to be occurring. And so we saw Polestars here in San Diego that had fleet license plates suggesting they were part of a rental fleet. Polestar 1s. It just wasn't it was a cool way to launch a brand, but like start with the special car and then trickle down. But there just wasn't enough interest in Polestar that people even knew what it was, and there certainly weren't people who were willing to pay that. You know, with cars like the LFA, you at least had old Lexus buyers who were like, you know what, I've always had Lexuses and I have Porsches too, but they're gonna give this a try, so I'm gonna try the LFA. Polestar didn't have any people who are like, this brand I love is making an expensive car, so I'm gonna go out and do it. It was just like, here's an upstart making an electric car that's way too expensive for what it offers. This car could not possibly be worth this. And that's what people felt, and that's how it ended up. And the Polestar 1 was not well received. It did not sell well. I guess they made the 1,500 of them, but it was a disappointing car, especially at that price point. It was really intended to be this special halo car. It just didn't quite have that effect. The styling was too restrained. The performance was nothing really special to write home about. It just wasn't special enough to justify its price tag. And it was this upstart brand that just couldn't justify a car like that. Okay, next up, most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed. This won't surprise people who know me and who I've talked about this a lot on the podcast. The Singer DLS. I drove a Singer 911, which Singer is this company that modifies Porsches in an unbelievable way that really dramatically improves older late 80s, early 90s 911s, and just puts a new engine in and radically changes the switchgear to make it incredibly gorgeous and wonderful and all that. And Singer makes a cool car. There's no doubt about it. I drove a Singer DLS. It was a $2.5 million car. And I've never driven a better $500,000 car. Like, that's the thing about the Singers is they're amazing, they're special, they're absolutely incredible, awesome cars, really incredible. But at $2.5 million, it's just hard for me. I'm just not enough of a Porsche guy. I'm not enough of one of those like watch enthusiasts who loves like the little button, how the machined face of that dial. I just don't get into those little details quite enough, I think, to appreciate what the Singer is and what the Singer offers. And as wonderful of a car as that is, I just can't justify that price tag. And so I wasn't disappointed in the car. It drove well. The stuff is cool, the way it looks, the way it feels. But I'm thinking for $2.5 million, there are so many really truly amazing F40s and Carrera GTs, so many truly amazing special supercars out there. It's just difficult to justify what is ultimately, to me, a modified Porsche 911. Now, there are people who wince at that and say, this is not a modified 911. It is 911 completely reimagined in this incredible way by this incredible company who takes this thing to a totally different level. And that is true, but I just think a lot of that stuff is lost on me at that price point. So again, this is my list with my subjective opinions of cars that disappointed me, and that's where I fall on that. It is definitely not necessarily an opinion that is shared by everybody, but it's just how I feel. Okay, two more most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed, and they're both Toyotas. One is the new Land Cruiser. I actually did a video solely devoted to how much I dislike the new Land Cruiser. You can go watch that. I'll link it below. But the general gist is, it's just not a Land Cruiser. It's not particularly compelling compared to other Toyota models. I don't really like how it looks. I don't really like the powertrains. I don't think that the seating configuration is great. They don't offer third row. There's a lot of disappointing things about the new Land Cruiser, and I say this as a guy who had two previous Land Cruisers and has a brand new Toyota Sequoia. I am a Toyota truck guy through and through. I've had three of them. I bought a new one. Like, I am into this market segment, and the new Land Cruiser really, really disappointed me. Clearly, the Sequoia TRD Pro and Platinum have moved into the segment where the Land Cruiser used to be, and the new Land Cruiser is really kind of just a gussied up, I mean, it's a gussied up 4Runner. It's not literally, but like the 4Runner offers basically everything the Land Cruiser does, except the Land Cruiser has this brand name, and so some people will pay more for that, but not the most educated people, I would say. It's people who want to look cool, people who actually believe in like off-roading and capability, etc., will either get a Sequoia or a 4Runner, depending on their point of view. Land Cruiser is just, it's not the car that I was hoping it would be. When they took it away, it went away for a few years. They announced it would come back. I had really high hopes, and they didn't deliver. And the other most disappointing car I've ever reviewed is also a Toyota. This is an obvious one, the Toyota BZ4X and its twin, the Subaru Solterra. Toyota has been very slow to enter into the electric car world. And I think one of the big reasons for this is that they don't necessarily think that electric is going to be the story of the future. That could be true. They finally had to enter into the EV space for compliance reasons. There were various governments that forced them to. And so they came out with this BZ4X. It is ugly. It is poorly named. It's a lowercase b, uppercase Z, number 4, uppercase X. The body cladding is a disaster. The price is way too high. The electric range is terrible. The cars are only selling with massive discounts and incentives. And Toyota's using this as an example to say, well, see, nobody likes electric cars. We don't need to make an electric car. We're being forced to make one. And it's like, no, you made a bad one. Like, people buy Teslas because they're good. Like, they are good cars and good values. You just made a bad one. In fact, the worst one. And I think the BZ4X and the Solterra are the worst electric cars on sale, or at least up in the top 5. And it's very disappointing, those cars. I didn't go in thinking they'd be great, but I was hoping that Toyota, a company that really makes great cars, would have their take on an EV also be great. It was like we waited a while for the Toyota EV. It finally came out. I was really hoping for the best, and we did not get the best. We did not get a great effort from Toyota for that car. It has been a disappointment, no question about it. They are the only Toyotas sitting on dealership lots. Toyota is in a huge hot streak right now with a lot of great cars that are very successful, and most Toyotas are selling tremendously quickly, except for the BZ4X and the Solterra. Just very disappointing, not successful cars. And it's a shame that after all that waiting, that is what Toyota decided to do with the EV. They could have taken their brand name, the name that gave us the Prius, one of the first hybrid cars, and really given us like an amazing electric car. And they decided not to do that. They really mailed in the development and gave us a mediocre car. And I think it's a shame. So there you go. My most disappointing cars I've ever reviewed. Obviously, I'm aware this list is going to be tremendously controversial and people will hate me. So be it. Bring on the hate. I can take it. And remember, these are my opinions. I'm not stating any of this is fact. It's just how I feel. I'm sorry if you own a Subaru Solterra. I'm really sorry, actually. Bye-bye.